Guards fire 14 rounds into the exercise yard. Bodies drop. Blood pools on concrete. February 23, 2000. Pelican Bay State Prison. 150 men are stabbing each other with sharpened metal torn from their own cell doors. Pepper spray doesn't stop them. Tear gas doesn't stop them. Rubber bullets don't stop them. 16 inmates shot. 1 dead. 32 stabbed. And this is just another Wednesday at the prison built to hold California's worst of the worst. The fighting started 9:30 in the morning. Hispanics converged on a smaller group of black inmates. Guards recovered 88 homemade weapons after the melee ended. Prison officials found something else too. Evidence that this wasn't spontaneous. Inmates had smuggled weapons onto the yard despite being searched that morning. One guard had told a prisoner before yard release, "It's your lucky day." Another guard whispered to an inmate, "Do whatever you're going to do today, because tomorrow the prison is going on lockdown." 20 miles south of the Oregon border, surrounded by redwood forests, electric fences carrying 50,000 volts. This is Pelican Bay State Prison. And what happened here changed American corrections forever. Real quick, what you just saw is only the beginning. If you want the full story about America's most secure prison, subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Hit the like button so this reaches more people. These investigations take months to verify, and most channels won't touch them. Let's continue. Pelican Bay opened in 1989 with a specific purpose. California's prison system was drowning in violence. Gang wars raged in San Quentin, Folsom, Corcoran. The state needed somewhere to send the inmates other prisons couldn't handle. The gang leaders, the shot callers, the men who ordered murders from behind bars. The facility cost taxpayers $275 million. It sits on 275 acres of isolated wilderness. The nearest city is Crescent City, population 7,000. The local economy depends almost entirely on this prison. Corrections officers, their families, support staff. The prison is the city, but the real innovation at Pelican Bay wasn't the location. It was the Security Housing Unit, the SHU. 1,056 cells designed specifically for long-term solitary confinement. Each cell measures 8 feet by 10 feet. Smooth poured concrete. No windows. Just a perforated steel door that lets guards see in but makes it almost impossible for prisoners to see out. A concrete slab with a thin foam pad serves as a bed. A steel combination sink and toilet. 2 concrete cubes for a desk and chair. Fluorescent lights that stay on 24 hours a day. Prisoners in the SHU spend 22.5 hours alone in these cells. They get 90 minutes for exercise in a concrete yard barely bigger than their cell. Alone, complete silence is maintained. No contact with other humans. No phone calls. No programs. No work. Just isolation. For years. Sometimes decades. The original design called for 2,280 inmates total. By 2001, Pelican Bay was operating with more than 3,300. The SHU that was designed for just over 1,000 held more than 1,500. Inmates were double-bunked in cells built for solitary confinement. 2 men from rival gangs locked in an 8x10 space together. The violence was inevitable. Court records describe what happened inside the SHU in those early years. Guards subjected inmates to what they called gladiator fights. They would intentionally release 2 prisoners from enemy gangs into the same area, then shoot at them after they began fighting. In April 1992, guards took Von Dorch to be bathed. Dorch was serving 10 years for grand theft. His mental illness had worsened in the SHU. He had smeared himself with feces. 5 or 6 guards handcuffed him and subjected him to a bath in scalding water. He suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns over half his body. He later won nearly $1 million from the state. A federal district court judge named Thelton Henderson reviewed the evidence in 1995. He ruled that Pelican Bay was not being operated constitutionally. His decision in Madrid versus Gomez specifically demanded changes to the use of excessive force by guards, inadequate medical and mental health care, and the practice of housing mentally ill prisoners in the SHU. Henderson wrote that the conditions caused senseless suffering and sometimes wretched misery. But the violence didn't stop, because Pelican Bay had become something else entirely. It had become the command center for California's prison gangs. 6 major prison gangs control California's system: the Mexican Mafia, LAIM, Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Nazi Lowriders, the Northern Structure. These organizations don't just operate inside prison walls. They run criminal empires on the streets. Drug trafficking, prostitution, money laundering, contract killings. And in 2006, California made a decision that changed everything. Officials decided to decapitate these organizations. They identified every major gang leader in the state system and transferred them all to one place: Pelican Bay's SHU. The idea was simple: lock them in solitary confinement, no contact with other inmates, no way to communicate, no way to give orders. Cut off the head and the body dies. But something unexpected happened instead. These men, locked in windowless cells, found ways to communicate. They used a technique called fishing. An inmate would tear up his underwear or bed sheet and braid the threads into a 40-foot line. He'd fashion a weight out of soap, then throw the line out under his steel door. Another inmate would throw his line out. They'd hook them together and reel in messages. Notes would fly down from upper tiers. Guards confiscated hundreds of these fishing lines. The communication never stopped. Prison officials discovered that gang leaders were manufacturing handcuff keys from metal inhaler parts. They were cutting weapons from the steel embedded in their cell door frames. One SHU inmate made one weapon per month from his door. Guards confiscated 1,258 weapons in the SHU in just 1 year, from August 2002 to August 2003. The gangs maintained rigid hierarchies. Generals, captains, lieutenants, soldiers. Members in the SHU would communicate with lieutenants on the street through visits. Messages were passed during non-contact visits, hidden in legal mail, smuggled in by corrupt staff. Miguel Perez was a Mexican mafia member who gunned down a witness in a murder trial. He later told authorities how his gang dispatched orders in visiting rooms. AP Cortina brutally beat and murdered a fellow gang member. He lived in the SHU for 9 years before renouncing his membership in Nuestra Familia. He described how crimes were ordered from within the SHU. Anywhere from murder to money laundering, bank robberies, armored car robberies, home invasions, drug deals, prostitution. The gangs place enormous emphasis on education. Former Aryan Brotherhood member Bob Overton described how members discipline themselves to study 3 or 4 hours every day. They study law, they learn the prison system, they identify weaknesses, and they maintain their power through violence. The Aryan Brotherhood's criminal complaint states, AB members are required, when ordered, to kill without hesitation. Members who do not fulfill their obligations to the AB are subject to murder. The gang formed alliances with unlikely partners. The Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brotherhood became allies, united against the Nuestra Familia and Black Guerrilla Family. Ronald Dean Yandel spent 15 years in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay. In 2016, prosecutors indicted him and 15 other Aryan Brotherhood members. Wiretaps on Yandel's contraband cell phone revealed his plans. He spoke of wanting to build an army within California prisons. He wanted to force rival white gangs across the state to submit. He allegedly recruited members of Public Enemy Number 1. He learned that 4 other white supremacist prison gangs had formed a secret alliance. He was building a coalition from inside a concrete tomb. The gangs operate across racial lines in the yard. A lone member of Nuestra Familia mixed with a crowd of Mexican mafia. The reaction is explosive. Black and Hispanic inmates clash. White gangs fight among themselves. Guards learned to manage the yard like volatile chemicals, release them in the wrong combination, and violence erupts. August 31st, 1999. Black and white prisoners fought on Pelican Bay's yard. Prison officials locked down the entire facility. Inmates were kept in their cells, except to shower, under guard once a day. The fight instigators were sent to the SHU. Officials didn't feel safe, allowing general population inmates to mingle. 6 months passed. February 23, 2000. Prison officials decided it was time. They allowed inmates back to the exercise yard. A week after they returned, the violence exploded. Rain had fallen the night before. The morning was gray and overcast. Around 9:30, 200 inmates were gathered on the B facility yard. Black and Hispanic prisoners began fighting using handmade weapons. 20 guards stood on the yard when the fighting began. They tried to pull inmates apart. They gave stand-down orders. The inmates ignored them. 75 to 100 more guards arrived. They deployed tear gas. The fighting continued. They deployed pepper spray. The inmates kept stabbing each other. They fired rubber bullets, wooden bullets. Nothing stopped the violence. Lieutenant Ben Grundy made the decision. Lethal force. Guards fired 14 rounds from .223 caliber Mini-14 semi-automatic rifles into the crowd of fighting inmates. The melee ended 30 minutes after it began. 16 inmates were shot. 32 were stabbed or slashed. 28 were taken to hospitals. 2 were in intensive care. 1 was in critical condition. 1 was dead. This was the most forceful and intensely violent outbreak in Pelican Bay's history. 16 ambulances rushed to the prison. Sutter Coast Hospital CEO John Minogue had worked there 14 years. He told reporters, "We've seen nothing close to it. The staff's pretty drained right now." But the wounded prisoners caused no problems. They were very calm and very thankful for their care. Guards recovered approximately 50 homemade weapons from the yard, but they had searched all prisoners before releasing them that morning. The weapons were already there, hidden, waiting. Some interviews suggested guards may have instigated the violence. One prisoner reported that a guard told him before yard release, "Do whatever you're going to do today, because tomorrow the prison is going on lockdown." Another guard told an inmate, "It's your lucky day." Don Novi, president of the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, called it a race riot. The African American inmates and the Southern Mexican inmates went at each other. He explained the mentality. These are people that don't get along with their fellow human beings, period. And anytime they come out they want to kill someone, they want to hurt someone. This was the first fatal shooting since California's Department of Corrections issued a new shooting policy in April 1999. But the violence at Pelican Bay wasn't new. In 1997, 6 inmates were killed in clashes between cellmates. 3 more were killed in 1998. The facility built to house 2,280 inmates held 3,400. About 1,200 were in permanent lockdown conditions. The FBI, already investigating civil rights violations at Pelican Bay, announced it would monitor the state's review. 2 former guards had just been indicted for violating prisoners' civil rights by arranging assaults. Another guard was convicted for shooting a prisoner after a fight in 1994. After Bloody Wednesday, the entire prison went on lockdown. The warden would decide when it ended. In his account of that day, an inmate named Kenneth Capo Greco described the violence as pervasive, the smell of blood literally filling the air. He watched a man named Marco get stabbed. Marco's last words were about his family. Capo Greco never delivered the message. 25 years later, he still sees Marco's face. Todd Ashker arrived at Pelican Bay's SHU in 1990. Prison officials validated him as an Aryan Brotherhood member. He was locked in an 8x10 cell, 22.5 hours a day. No windows, no programs, no contact with other humans. Years passed, then decades. By 2011, Ashker had been in solitary confinement for 21 years. He wasn't alone. Across California, more than 3,000 inmates were locked in SHU units. Many had been there for over a decade. The only ways out were to parole, debrief, or die. Debriefing meant providing information that incriminated others. But multiple sources described how desperate inmates would provide false information just to escape solitary. Innocent people got validated as gang members based on lies. Their families became targets, and the isolation continued. Something unprecedented happened in those SHU cells. The worst enemies in California's prison system began talking to each other. Leaders from the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, sworn enemies. They started phishing messages, communicating, finding common ground. They realized they all faced the same torture, the same endless isolation, the same hopeless system. In 2011, they did something that had never happened before. They put aside their racial and gang conflicts. They formed an agreement. The Pelican Bay State Prison, SHU Short Corridor Collective. On July 1st, 2011, thousands of inmates at Pelican Bay refused food. Within 3 weeks, the strike grew to 6,600 prisoners across 13 California facilities. They issued 5 core demands: eliminate group punishments for individual violations, abolish the debriefing policy, end long-term solitary confinement, provide adequate food, expand programs for indefinite SHU inmates. California officials promised to make changes. After approximately 3 weeks, the inmates resumed eating. But months passed. The promised reforms didn't come. In September 2011, inmates launched a second strike. They claimed they were being treated worse than before. 3 inmates committed suicide during this time. After 3 weeks, the strike ended again when officials promised a comprehensive review of every SHU prisoner. 2 years passed. Of the 4,500 inmates in California's SHUs, only 382 had been reviewed. Prison authorities returned about half to general population. The comprehensive reform never materialized. On July 8, 2013, the inmates launched a third strike. This time, over 30,000 prisoners across California's prison system refused food. It was the largest prison protest in American history. The collective had done something revolutionary. They had gotten all racial groups to agree to band together. Black, Hispanic, white, Asian, all unified against prolonged solitary confinement. The strike lasted 60 days. Inmates were hospitalized. Medications were withheld in attempts to coerce prisoners into eating. But they continued. An inmate named Billy Garrow, cell died after requesting medical attention for 7 days. Families organized protests outside prisons. Activists demonstrated in Oakland, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Mississippi, London, Germany. Palestinian prisoners on hunger strike in Israeli prisons sent messages of solidarity. Actor Danny Glover joined the cause. His nephew had served at Pelican Bay in solitary confinement. Judge Thelton Henderson signed an order permitting refeeding of participating prisoners. But lawmakers intervened. Senator Lonnie Hancock and Assembly Member Tom Amiano promised to hold public hearings on solitary confinement and consider legislation. On September 5, 2013, the remaining strikers resumed eating. In May 2012, the Center for Constitutional Rights and other organizations had filed a class action lawsuit, Ashker versus Governor of California. The lawsuit charged that California's practice of indefinite solitary confinement violated the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. In 2015, they reached a landmark settlement. California agreed to end indeterminate solitary confinement. Prisoners couldn't be sent to the SHU simply for alleged gang ties. They couldn't spend more than 5 years in solitary. It fundamentally changed the way California uses isolation. In April 2024, Todd Ashker walked to the prison dining hall. He sat at a table with other men and ate. After more than 3 decades, he shared a meal with fellow human beings. But he says the fight isn't over. Pelican Bay still stands. The electric fences still carry 50,000 volts. The guard towers still watch over the yards. The SHU still houses inmates in solitary confinement. But something has changed. The 2015 settlement didn't solve everything. As of 2019, over 1,500 people remained in California SHUs. But the reforms did accomplish something unprecedented. They proved that the so-called worst of the worst could organize nonviolent resistance. They proved that sworn enemies could unite for a common cause. They proved that change was possible. The violence hasn't ended. In 2019, 16 Aryan Brotherhood members, including Ronald Yandel, were charged with killings and drug smuggling from within California's most secure prisons. Gang activity continues. But the scale has changed. Some inmates have found redemption. David Nguyen, an inmate at Pelican Bay, became a writer for the prison newspaper. He joined an audio journalism class. He learned to tell stories. Others participated in arts, in corrections programs. They created art. They performed. They showed that even in America's most dangerous prison, humanity could survive. The community outside Pelican Bay learned to gauge the severity of incidents by the sound of sirens along Lake Earl Drive. But in recent years, those sirens have been quieter. The riots that were once routine have become less frequent. The violence that was expected has decreased. What happened at Pelican Bay changed American corrections. It exposed the psychological torture of indefinite solitary confinement. It revealed how isolation can worsen mental illness rather than improve behavior. It demonstrated that even maximum security facilities could reduce violence without endless isolation. The United Nations considers prolonged solitary confinement to be torture. The 2013 hunger strike brought California face-to-face with that reality. Over 30,000 prisoners participated. They starved themselves for 60 days. Some died. Others were never the same. But they accomplished what seemed impossible. The settlement in Ashker versus Governor of California is still under court supervision. Monitors continue to evaluate California's compliance. The fight continues in courtrooms and legislative chambers. Bills are introduced to further restrict solitary confinement. Governors veto them. Advocates push back. The cycle continues. Pelican Bay was built to be the end of the line. The place where California sends inmates that other prisons can't control. For decades, it lived up to that reputation. The gladiator fights, the scalding water, the endless isolation, the mass shootings in the yard, the smell of blood in the air. But it also became something else. It became the birthplace of one of the largest prison protests in American history. It became the place where gang leaders from different races put aside decades of hatred to fight a common enemy. It became proof that even in the darkest corners of the criminal justice system, Human beings never stop fighting for dignity. The electric fence still stands. The concrete cells still hold men in isolation. The gangs still operate. The violence still happens. But the narrative has changed. Pelican Bay isn't just the story of California's most dangerous yard. It's the story of how the men locked in those cells fought back, how they organized, how they endured, how they changed the system that was designed to break them. That's the real legacy of Pelican Bay State Prison.